Ready up, squadron, came the command through the team's headsets. Check your gear and prep for departure. Myers started methodically securing the various pouches of her assault vest, tightening the straps of her tactical garb and making sure she could quickly reach her spare ammo, just in case the mission went sideways. Beside her, the rest of the Deltas on the team were doing the exact same, buckling into their seats or checking their weapons were locked and loaded. Sat on the opposite side of the aircraft, Cole had his helmet and mask off, loudly chewing gum with his mouth open, showing off the disgusting contents. When her eyes drifted over to him, he tried to give her a wink, resulting in Myers rolling her eyes. "You know, you should really close your mouth when you do that, Cole," she said, to which he sneered back at her. "Your face looks like a clogged garbage disposal." "Cut the chatter," Gamma Leader interrupted. They weren't present with the team, instead coordinating their movements from the safety of an undisclosed location through their headsets. "Do I need to remind you that this isn't a field trip, Delta Unit?" "Sir, no sir," Myers replied, gritting her teeth. "Good. Now then, all you listen up and listen good," the voice continued. "This operation has been approved by the engineer himself, so let's keep it quick, clean, and quiet. You all know your target, SCP-096. You are to enter Site-19, capture the creature, and deliver it to our client, Valentin Zukovich, at the rendezvous location. The use of deadly force against Foundation personnel is, as always, authorized." The team already knew all of this. They'd been over it in their briefing before, but the insurgency demanded total efficiency and zero ambiguity about the Delta's objective. "Now, each of you have been issued with a pair of live feed goggles," Gamma Leader explained as they described them. Myers and the other members of the team all produced their goggles. As you know, these aren't just relaying your visuals to us here. Your goggles have a camera lens at the front and will transmit that feed directly to your eyes. Given the nature of the SCP we're going after, the goggles have been programmed to detect faces and pixelate them, so you should circumvent any problems created by the creature's anomalous abilities. Myers slipped her goggles over her eyes and flipped the switch to activate them. Immediately, her vision was filled with the feet of Cole directly opposite of her. Only now, his entire face had been obscured, replaced with a digital jumble of pixels. It was exactly like the cop shows she used to watch as a kid, how they would blur out a suspect's face to hide their identity. Delta Myers smirked, glad that she could no longer see Cole's face. "Well, this is a definite improvement, Cole," she taunted. "Now I don't have to look at you chewing with your mouth open." "Another important reminder," Gamma Leader announced. "Mr. Zukovich is one of the Chaos Insurgency's wealthiest benefactors. He's not just offered us funding in exchange for undertaking this mission, but if you pull this off, he'll grant us access to his fellow oligarchs. That means more people to offer potential investment in the insurgency. So remember, Delta Unit, we have a lot riding on this." With that, the aircraft began to whir into life, lifting upwards off the ground. The insurgency had been developing this new high-speed stealth craft for a while, a modified troop carrier that was capable of both vertical takeoff and landing. The technicians had boasted it could reach supersonic flight speeds in seconds, effectively launching Chaos Insurgents at enemy locations where they could be deployed, complete their objective, and escape in the craft all within a matter of minutes. "Oh, and one more thing," Gamma Leader stated as the stealth craft climbed higher. "We have a contact within Site-19, Junior Researcher Bartram. He's agreed to let you in. Of course, the last thing we want is the Foundation squeezing any info out of him after you've departed. You know what to do. Safe travels, Delta Unit." A building mechanical sound of rapid acceleration filled the stealth craft, followed by a loud boom as the engines kicked into gear. Inside, Myers and her fellow members of the Chaos Insurgency, Deltas Griffith, Slater, and Cole, all gripped their seats tightly as they were rocked by the extreme force of the craft's speed. It shot through the sky, hurtling towards the coordinates of its target, reaching Mach 3 in a matter of seconds. Outside the hull, a sonic boom rang out like a foreboding sound of an ominous thundercrack. Invisible to radar, sonar, and even protected against most anomalous forms of detection, the stealth craft zipped through the air, gradually lowering its breakneck speed as it came within several miles of Site-19. Continuing its approach, the aircraft slowed to a hovering stop above the Foundation facility. Unbuckling from their seats, each of the Deltas made their way to the ramp opening up at the rear of the craft and began to descend a cable lower and lower toward the roof. Junior Researcher Bartram had been pacing nervously back and forth near the door that led from the roof to a stairwell down into Site-19. As he waited for the insurgency's arrival, he couldn't stop himself from trembling. only to turn and feel his heart jump in his chest at the sight of the Delta unit approaching him. "You Bartram?" Griffith asked. Yeah? The researcher nodded awkwardly. "We need your key card," the Delta said. "Oh, yeah, sure thing." Bartram rummaged through his pockets, producing his Foundation-issued ID and handing it over. It wasn't until the card left his fingers that a thought struck him. The security system logs where personnel tapped in their card. "If you use mine to spring 096, they'll think it was me who did it." "That's the idea," Slater replied apathetically as Griffith raised his weapon and fired a single silent shot. After dragging Bartram's body away, the team used his card to unlock the roof door and make their way down the stairwell. Each one of them knew the way. They all had been to Site-19 plenty of times before back in the day. You see, of all things with an equal and opposite reaction in the universe, the Foundation was born out of their own organization. The Chaos Insurgency had begun its life as part of the SCP Foundation, an off-the-books Black Ops unit created by the mysterious, elusive O5 Council as a front to carry out some of the organization's more nefarious activities. But the original insurgency ultimately defected, breaking away from the Foundation and becoming a splinter group. Their sole purpose was to eliminate their rivals, the SCP Foundation, and they'd utilize any means, even their own anomalies, to achieve that goal. Like many others within the insurgency's ranks, Myers, Griffith, Slater, and Cole had been scouted while they were still part of the Foundation. Each of the Delta unit had either formerly been security personnel or a mobile task force operator, meaning they had the skills that made them useful to the Chaos Insurgency. On top of that, they'd all become disillusioned with the Foundation. Its constant secrecy and lies were frustrating enough, but their dangerous, anomalous experiments, all the deaths they had caused directly or indirectly, had highlighted something far worse to the Deltas. The Foundation placed more importance on the containment in SCP than protecting the world. Moving silently through the halls of Site-19, keeping their formation tight to cover all angles in front and behind them, Slater gave a hand signal, indicating they were free to go weapons hot if they encountered any Foundation personnel on their way towards the target. Myers still had her goggles active, even though they hadn't reached SCP-096's cell yet. Even though she despised the Foundation and what they had done, not being able to see the faces of passing researchers and security personnel made it a little easier to pull the trigger. The team approached the airtight steel cube that housed their target. All of the Deltas knew they needed to be quick. While there were no recording or surveillance devices inside the creature's cell, it wouldn't take long for the Foundation to spot the trail of bodies the team had left on their way down. Griffith gave a nod for the others to activate their goggles, his face already a scrambled, pixelated blur from Myers' point of view. Then, with a wave of the stolen keycard, the door to the cell opened. As you may have already gathered, the goggles being worn by the Deltas were actually based on a pre-existing Foundation technology. The infamous Scramble goggles, brought to us by the highly duplicitous Dr. Dan. However, as anyone familiar with 096's files know, those goggles were imperfect creations, and got a lot of MTF operatives killed. However, scientists paid off by the deep pockets of Chaos Insurgency benefactors had worked tirelessly on improving the technology, until they finally made for a viable 096 protection device. Still, even with the goggles masking its haunting, wide-jawed face, and even after Cole had gently thrown a hood over the Shy Guy's face, Myers couldn't bring herself to look at it for too long. It felt wrong, like it was forbidden, despite knowing it wouldn't harm her or the other Deltas unless they looked directly at its face. SCP-096 was usually docile and calm when unobserved, and while it didn't seem to be anywhere near as agitated as it got whenever its face was seen, the towering creature was notably confused as Slater looped a leash around its neck and started guiding it out of the cell with an animal control pole. Suddenly, the alarm started blaring. The Foundation knew they were there. The Shy Guy still didn't become enraged, but began sobbing slightly underneath the hood covering it. "Move! Move!" Myers shouted over the noise as the Deltas started doubling back the way they had come, traversing the corridors back towards the stairwell. Any of the pixel-faced Foundation staff that the insurgents saw was quickly dispatched, bullets being spat out of the barrels of their weapons. As the Deltas reached the roof, the stealth craft was waiting for them. They quickly boarded with SCP-096 in tow. It sat at the far end of the craft, hunched over itself, rocking back and forth slightly as the troop carrier took off and shot towards its next destination. "Nice work, Delta Unit." Gamma Leader congratulated the team over their headsets. "There's been a slight change of plans. Mr. Zukovich has requested us to forgo meeting at the agreed rendezvous. He wants you to bring SCP-096 to him directly. He's arriving at his compound as we speak. That was the part of the whole operation that didn't sit right with Myers at all. They had just risked their lives to secure the Shy Guy, only to hand him over to some wealthy oligarch. It didn't seem to make sense or align with the insurgency's goals. "With respect, sir," she spoke up, "what benefit is this to us? Why turn over the anomaly to Zukovich? What does he want with it?" "What Mr. Zukovich wants is none of our concern, Delta Myers," the mission coordinator retorted abruptly. "And as for the why, he's worth billions to us as a continued ally, so I advise you to watch your tone unless—" "Money?" Myers interrupted. "Is that seriously the only reason we're doing this? The Chaos Insurgency aren't supposed to be mercenaries. We're meant to be harming the Foundation, using anomalies as tools to achieve that goal." There was a few long, awkward seconds of radio silence, the other Deltas staring uncertainly at Myers, too cowardly to speak up. "You're right," Gamma Leader replied, ending the uncomfortable pause. Their tone was an unnerving calm, like they were holding back from letting loose in rage. "Anomalies are useful tools for us achieving what we need. And right now, what the insurgency needs is to secure funding from Valentin Zukovich and his fellow wealthy compatriots. So, for the last time, deliver the package as instructed, or face the reprimand." Arriving outside the compound, walls with barbed wire at the top towering over their stealth craft, the team marched towards the front gate, guiding SCP-096 along by its neck. The creature seemed to have calmed down, barely making much in the way of noise, even with the hood muffling it. But that calm did little to settle the tension Myers still felt, and neither did the arrival of Zukovich's aide, coming out to lead the Deltas into one of the many buildings of the wealthy oligarch's complex. The doors to the building opened, and a cacophony of noise came flooding out. Screeching, roaring, howling so loud it was almost deafening. Inside was like a zoo, or a zoo without enclosures. All around, exotic animals were held in cramped cages, empty of anything save for the wildlife they house. There were lions, tigers, bears, oh yes, and many more besides these. Each one of them was illegally imported or stolen, all now contributing to the exotic menagerie of one Valentin Zukovich. "Welcome, welcome, my friends!" The billionaire greeted them eagerly, his thick accented voice booming, just audible against the various animal noises. "The operatives of the Chaos Insurgency for you, sir," the aide announced as he gestured his hand towards the Delta unit. "Excellent, excellent. Yes, very good. Get these hard-working people the case, Anatoly," Zukovich replied with a swat of his hand. "Now, let me see what you brought. Let me look at my newest pet." "He wants it as a pet?" Myers heard Cole mutter next to her. Zukovich looked at SCP-096 with wonder. It was clear he had never seen a creature like it, but had no doubt heard the stories of what it could do. Reaching out a hand, the wealthy oligarch gently patted the creature's hairless skin. "So docile," he remarked in surprise when the Shy Guy did little to react. "Why is his bag overhead?" A collective split-second's panic hit every one of the Deltas as they watched Zukovich's hand reaching up to lift the hood from SCP-096's face. It was Slater who reacted first, grabbing the billionaire by the wrist, stopping him before it was too late. "Sorry, sir, but I don't think that's an advisable idea," he said, releasing the man's hand. Zukovich paused for a second, an angered look on his face. Suddenly, he launched a fist at Slater, gripping him by his uniform, then struck again and again. As their benefactor kept punching him, Slater screamed in pain until he couldn't anymore, a sickening gurgle taking its place. When he was finally released, he fell to the floor still. "It's not advisable idea to touch me either," Zukovich scoffed, spitting on Slater's body. "We meant no disrespect, Mr. Zukovich," Myers spoke up. "It's just, you shouldn't provoke it. Anyone who looks at SCP-096's face dies." The oligarch turned to face her, his anger suddenly replaced worryingly fast with a look of curiosity. "Really? Tell me how they die. Instant, like heart attack?" he asked, mimicking a death rattle, then chuckling. "No, sir, it finds them," she replied. "Reports differ. Some indicate it kills anyone that sees its face with its bare hands. The exact method is unclear because there are never any bodies. It never leaves any trace. If you see its face, it'll annihilate you completely. That's why they call it the Shy Guy." "Shy Guy. I like this," Zukovich laughed. "It is harder to kill from inside a cage." "I don't think it matters." Myers thought about shooting back with that, but instead kept it in. At the moment Zukovich's aide returned carrying a steel case, he reached around it and unclipped the lid, showing off rows of $100 bills bound together in stacks. Fair day's pay for fair day's work, yes? Zukovich announced. As Cole went to collect the case, the aide snapped it shut again. There is just one more favor I ask you to do for me, the oligarch announced. I host party tonight, big party. I want to show off my new, what do you call it, shy guy. My friends are all very wealthy, could offer money to your insurgency. With all due respect, Myers found herself echoing the phrase for a second time that day, without holding any respect for either of the people it had been directed at. The Chaos Insurgency is not your private security force. Delta Myers, quiet! Gamma Leader hissed in her earpiece. Zukovich's connections could lead to potentially billions, no trillions, worth of financial backing for the insurgency. You will do as he asks, or so help me, I will kill you myself. A few hours after begrudgingly agreeing, Myers found herself standing in the menagerie room, itching in the suit Zukovich's staff had instructed her and the other Deltas to wear. All around her were more wealthy, corrupt figures with close ties, and similarly sized bank accounts to Zukovich. The guests were milling about, drinking flutes of expensive champagne, observing the captive animals up close, or taunting them in their cages. In the center of the room, a new cage had been placed with a shroud covering it, and SCP-096 inside. Friends! Zukovich announced. Today is great day! Thanks to my friends in the Chaos Insurgency, I am now the proud owner of a creature like no other. He staggered towards the covered cage, gripping the shroud covering it in his free hand. I present to you the Shy Guy! He pulled the cover away, met with a few scattered sounds of confusion and surprise from his rich guests. Only one or two made frightening gasps at the sight of what was within. Sure enough, there, sitting timidly in its cage, was SCP-096. It was calm, its face still covered with its hood. It's just sitting there, one of the guests yelled. Hardly very impressive. What does it do, Valentine? Another one of his wealthy compatriots asked. Well, it, mostly just sort of sits there, Zukovich replied, before turning to look at the tall humanoid creature. Suddenly, without warning and by force of some intoxicated thought, he hurled his champagne bottle at the creature. Do something! Entertain my guests! He yelled. The glass bottle hit SCP-096 and shattered. Instantly, the creature recoiled, howling in pain, met with more taunting laughter from the gathered guests watching it. It started shaking and sobbing heavily, weeping loudly, which only elicited more laughs from them all. But Myers and the other Deltas weren't laughing, instead looking in horror as SCP-096 drew itself up to its full towering height and pulled off its hood. It stared with sunken eyes at the crowd, their taunts petering off and turning to silence for a moment. Not so shy now, yes? Zukovich laughed. Then it screamed. SCP-096 went into a fit full of rageful despair, dashing through the bars of its cage and immediately dispatching Zukovich. The wealthy guests all began screaming in horror at what was happening, as the Shy Guy raced up to each of them one by one, killing them all in a chain reaction before looking at its face. Myers dashed for the exit, aware she didn't have her goggles to block the sight of the creature's wide-jawed, screaming expression. Maybe she could get far away. The stealth craft could take her anywhere, maybe fast enough to evade the insurgency and 096. She thought the Shy Guy was too busy with the assembled guests of the now-deceased Zukovich, and that would mean she could slip away unscathed. It was only when she saw it appear in front of her, in the blink of an eye screeching in despair as it towered over Myers, that she realized she had thought wrong. Now go and check out SCP-096, A Lesson in Power, and SCP-096 Picture Perfect for more stories of everyone's favorite homicidal introvert.